the conversation in the therapy world and community has kind of gotten lost in this like weaponizing therapy speak thing. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapeutic things on the channel. And today we're talking about boundaries and this question that, like, can boundaries become toxic? This is sort of tangentially related, in my opinion, to the conversation about like the weaponization of therapy speak. We haven't talked about that like explicitly on the channel before, so if you want me to make a video about that specifically, let me know. But today we're talking about toxic boundaries because I saw two TikToks. I suppose it's like a TikTok and a stitch, but that sort of served as like inspiration for this video. So I want to show you those and then have a conversation with you about my thoughts as a therapist about like, is this true that boundaries can be toxic? So let's watch this video.
I think it's okay to ask your friends to ride to the airport, even LAX, even at rush hour. And actually, it's more than okay, it's radical. Because there's this thing called the small favors economy, and the idea is essentially that in the past, people used to rely on their community, their network, their neighbors for small favors. Things like rides to the airport, things like a cup of sugar, things like borrowing a dress for an event. But now, with late stage capitalism, those things all seem like rude for us to ask because we could just do them ourselves. Like we could just call an Uber instead of inconveniencing a friend, or we could order a dress on Amazon and have it get there tomorrow, or we could like Postmate our groceries instead of like asking around if anyone has anything. And that's actually really bad because it drives us further into isolation from each other and from our friends, which is good for literally no one except for the people who are trying to sell us stuff on our phones. Honestly, I think we all need to get a little bit more comfortable with the idea of inconvenience. It's really not that bad. And actually can, in this case, be really good. Like if you ask your friend for a favor, they'll ask you for a favor. And it's a great cycle and a great way to deepen that friendship and stop our loneliness epidemic. So if you are my friend, I will be asking you for a ride from the airport soon. It's good for us, so say yes. And I offer too. Like I am out here offering airport rides, to be clear. If you're gonna ask for small favors, you gotta give and offer small favors.
So before I show you the stitch, first and foremost, I want to talk about the fact that this is why it's important for therapists to be people who don't pretend that we don't exist in the same world that our clients do, right? In like therapy school, when they teach you about being like an appropriate therapist and your appropriate like therapist boundaries and all of this stuff, there's a lot of discourse about like the blank slate therapist and how like you're not supposed to like be a person, basically. I, from the beginning, fundamentally fucking disagree with this take because the truth is that therapists are people and that we live in the same world that our clients do. So it is simply disingenuous to pretend that we are not also being affected by, and also that our clients aren't being affected by things like capitalism and these systemic issues that like are largely stealing our time and attention and like space for each other, especially in regards to building community and things like that. So this is just a PSA generally that like if you're a therapist, first of all, please know that like this is why it's important for us as clinicians to not pretend like our clients don't, or like our clients do exist in a vacuum, because like we don't, our lives don't, and they are very much being affected by the environments in which we all live. And also, if you're a therapy consumer or client, please know that it's okay to want to have these conversations with a therapist and to want a therapist who's validating of that and who won't do the thing where they're like, like that's not helpful or true. It's also not genuine or authentic. So again, this is just a PSA that it's important for therapy to be an inclusive and intersectional discipline that is, again, like validating and affirming of the objective truth, which is that we all live in a capitalist hellscape. I want to show you the stitch to this video, so we're going to watch this and then talk about it.
I think it's okay to ask your friends to ride to the airport, even LAX, even at rush hour. And actually, it's more than okay.
First of all, she's absolutely right and she should say it. Also, please excuse the decor. I'm hosting a baby shower tomorrow. But anyway, in this video, she talks rightfully about how capitalism has really eroded the entire concept of favors and reframed everything that we do for each other, even acts of love, as being a form of labor. But I would also like to say that this is partially the fault of our current discourse around mental health and therapy. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm definitely glad that it's less stigmatized to have certain mental illnesses, although a lot of them are still extremely stigmatized. But the way that we often talk about mental health and self-care now is like so hyper-individual that it's basically antagonistic to the concept of community. Like everything's a zero-sum game where doing something for someone else inherently takes away from you rather than building strong social ties that will serve you through your whole life. And it's made it so I think a lot of people are genuinely afraid to ask for favors because it's now viewed as a kind of intrusion. Anyway, I think that mental health talk is pushing us toward a world where we all have perfect boundaries and no real friends.
So a couple of things off the jump. First and foremost, this creator, I want to acknowledge first and foremost that like I don't know who they are, right? Like this is a video that showed up on my For You page. So this content is not meant to be like, yay, that person specifically. Both of these TikToks serve the purpose of being an opener for hosting a greater conversation about this issue and like toxic boundaries boundaries and all of that stuff. I also want to acknowledge that this second creator has at some point in her career posted or written articles that are very misogynistic and judgmental in nature that she has since apologized for. And she's spoken about how she has made an effort to continue to unlearn this like pick me attitude and her own internalized misogyny to be a better person. And like that's her own thing. But I just wanted to acknowledge that that's the case again, because we're not trying to like uplift, especially that, but like this person specifically, more so we're trying to have a conversation about the general theme of this conversation. The first thing about this that I think is important to address, like this is something that I have been like pretty outspoken about on the channel, I would say from the beginning. We have a whole playlist about boundaries, by the way, so if you don't know, I'll put that up there. But the conversation about boundaries is commonly misunderstood to be a thing that we can use to try to control other people. This sucks. Like, please don't do that. I want to be clear from the outset here that the conversation about boundaries is more so about what we do with ourselves, the decisions that we make for us in order to protect our peace in response to other people's behavior. Boundaries should never be a thing where we say, you're not allowed to X, Y, or Z, otherwise I'm invoking some kind of consequence for you, but rather about saying, hey, this thing that you said or did hurt my feelings, caused me harm. I'd appreciate if you didn't do that. And then the next time that they do that, making a choice about our own behavior or our own involvement to say, hey, I asked you not to do this. You did it anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and like hang up the phone now. I'm going to not respond to this text message. I'm going to remove myself from this social gathering. I'm going to spend less and less time with you if you continue to be a person who does things that harm me, et cetera, right? We're controlling ourselves. We're making decisions about us rather than trying to force someone to do or not do something. Okay, before we talk more about that, I want to talk to you guys about my self-care routine actually, because June's Journey is sponsoring this week's episode, and June's Journey is a free to download mobile game that is actually one of my favorite ways to decompress at the end of the day. For those of you who don't know, June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game that you solve the central plot, which is like a murder mystery storyline as you progress through the game. And the story, first of all, is like actually very interesting, but also the scenes that you find hidden objects in are so colorful and beautiful and like genuinely kind of meditative. There's just something about finding the little hidden objects that like scratches a part of my brain that just feels so good. My other favorite part about June's Journey is that you get a mansion that you can update or upgrade and customize your little garden island. And I think mine looks really great. I'll show you guys what mine looks like right now. But I love that you get two aspects of this game that are like, first of all, again, kind of meditative and creative and fun, but also to help progress you through the murder mystery plot line that is really fun to solve. I think it's clear at this point that I'm a big fan of June's Journey, and I feel like you will be too. So click the link in the description, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen right now to download June's Journey. Show June's Journey some love for showing me some love. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS devices, by the way. It's also available on PC through Facebook Games. So go click that link, download June's Journey, get yourself some self-care time in, and also, again, show June's Journey some love for showing me some love. Thank you again to June's Journey for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. The other part of this is that the take that like healthy boundaries look like sectioning yourself off from the entire world and being off in your own little island, that like that's healthy. That is very much a product of the white supremacist and like prejudicial origins of the therapy and psychology community, right? Like we have to acknowledge, especially like as therapists, in my opinion, that the field was founded by like mostly white men who were largely racist and prejudicial. And so that's kind of baked into the DNA of the discipline. And it's important for us to be intersectional and inclusive providers that we be like interrogating where and how those biases show up, right? This is very much one of those things, especially as a person who grew up in a Mexican family and like, you know, is familiar with the culture that like has a pretty large communal focus, right? Which like, yes, at times can be toxic. There is definitely an aspect of like enmeshment that can show up, and especially like community coercion of trying to like force people to do the things that we think they should do in order to like fit into our family or our community. That's a thing that's worth addressing and worth talking about. And I think it's possible to host this conversation about boundaries, finding the happy medium between these two things, right? Healthy boundaries don't look like having this hyper individualistic approach to life where you section yourself off and you just exist on your little island by yourself and you never do anybody favors unless it specifically benefits you. And healthy boundaries also don't look like being a person who has no autonomy, no agency, and only seeks to serve or uplift the values and beliefs of the people around you for their approval, right? Like the healthy thing is in the middle of these two things. And like, in my opinion, this is not a controversial take, right? But this is a thing that we've seen perpetuated a lot in the last couple of years, especially with the rise of like the very white-centric, like new age therapy thing where folks will say these things about how like you need to protect your peace and you can't be doing X, Y, or Z. And it's like this very prescriptive approach to boundary setting, right? Which is kind of like at the core of both of these videos. And I want to talk about this because as a therapist, like, you know, I think I've been pretty outspoken on the channel that like, in my opinion, it's important for us as clinicians to continuing to be evaluating how our practice can be and should be improved, like communally, right? And this is very much one of those things that like in the effort of trying to educate folks about how to improve their mental health and their lives and their relationships, it does kind of get to a point where we're doing the treadmill thing, right? We've talked about this on an episode of the pod. If you don't know, by the way, Erin and I have a podcast together, link below. We talked about this on an episode of the podcast, which is that this fallacy of constant self-improvement is so damaging and so harmful. The idea that you can at one point ascend humanhood and be perfect is like, first of all, wrong. Like that's not true, but it's also really toxic. It locks people into this cycle where you're having to continue to like listen to another self-help podcast and listen to another self-help audiobook and like do more and more and more and constantly be in therapy and constantly be setting better boundaries and being healthier and advocate here and communicate there and like vulnerability there. And it's just like all so overwhelming and like kind of devoid of humanity, honestly. I think like as a therapist, I feel, I don't know, called to encouraging people to embrace a more humanistic aspect of being a human, right? Which means then that sometimes we will have enmeshed or unhealthy boundaries and that like that's just part of being a human. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that like no one should ever work on their boundaries ever. That's not the point here either. But there is a very like hyper individualistic tinge to this idea that like at some point you can have the most perfect boundaries, that you will be like the most perfect person, and like that's not true, right? The truth is that some of us will have boundaries that means we are a little bit over involved, maybe a little bit under involved with some people, and that like again, that's just part of being a human being, in my opinion. Just really quick as an addendum, I also want to point out the fact that we as human beings are existing in a world and in an environment that really is not all that different from like our counterparts in like the, I don't know, like nature, animal kingdom aspect of things, right? What I'm saying is that the idea that we need community, that we exist as part of an ecosystem is part of being a human being again. And so this very hyper individualistic approach to boundary setting also robs us of the joy of existing in community with folks and being part of something larger. There is a reason that people from an anthropological perspective are drawn to in-groups and out-groups, or to creating communities and groups generally. It's because we're designed to exist in an ecosystem. It is simply unrealistic that we can meet all of our own needs and expectations and wants and desires by ourselves. We are designed to exist in community, and that will mean then that sometimes our boundaries, again, are not exactly perfect, that we might have a little bit of like over-involvement or enmeshment here or there. And then in my opinion, this is just the cost of doing business and part of being in community with folks. The second part of this that I want to talk about is the capitalist mindset that's sort of underpinning all of these things, right? Like the idea of like a favors economy even. All of that is kind of rooted in this very capitalistic mindset that like if I do something for someone else that doesn't immediately benefit me, therefore that time is wasted, right? Especially if I'm doing something for someone and that time doesn't result in me being financially compensated, then that time is wasted, right? This sucks. I think that goes without saying, but it's also part of this like, it's a byproduct of living in this world that tells us that in order for us to be allowed to survive, we are forced into selling our time and our labor, right? This is another one of those areas where like we can get into sort of a heady conversation about capitalism that like we don't necessarily have to get into today, but I do want to encourage folks to just be mindful of this, because that idea that your time or attention should inherently be correlated with whether or not it's making you money is a thing that serves to uplift like our capitalist overlords, and like that's not helpful to you, right? What's actually helpful for our mental health is having relationships and community with folks that we're checked in with, and that we have this mutual understanding of love and care and like compassion, like genuine desire to help and be of service to one another. Also, for what it's worth, I do love the video from the original creator, but I also want to talk about this idea that like doing favors for someone is a good thing because then they'll pay you back for the favor, and this creates a sort of like reciprocity thing. This is also kind of a capitalist thing for what it's worth, and I do want to encourage people to unlearn this also. We talked about this on an episode of the pod also I'm saying also like every other word. You get it. This idea that relationships are like a piggy bank thing can be kind of a point of contention for folks, right? I do want to encourage you to remember that if we're doing someone a favor or we're choosing to do something kind or whatever, ideally we're doing it because we genuinely are okay with doing that. To me, this is sort of similar to the advice that, like, I don't know if you guys have ever gotten this advice. In my mind, it's kind of a cliche, but maybe it's not. But this advice of like never give someone more money than you're willing to just have thrown in the toilet, basically. They're like, if you're going to financially help somebody out in like a tough spot, never give somebody more money than you're like able to give, but also that you're like comfortable never seeing again, right? To me, this is kind of a similar thing that like, if you're not willing to do a favor for someone unless there is a like return on investment for you, it might not be a good idea for you to be giving that favor away, because ideally when we're doing somebody a service or a favor or whatever, we're doing it genuinely because we just want to, and we're not expecting anything in return. This idea of perfect reciprocity in relationships can, first of all, be sort of a losing game, but also be a thing that creates resentment later in the relationship, because we can run into this situation where like, maybe I can't pay someone back, or maybe I can't give you a perfect favor. Or also like, what does a perfect reciprocity look like, right? To me, returning the favor for you buying me a coffee might be something different than what you think it is. And so now we have this confusion and this misunderstanding. And how do we quantify really what is actually like good enough in return for another favor? We can kind of get lost in the weeds here with this very sticky conversation about like what's enough, what's not enough, who's right, who's wrong. So again, I want to encourage people to unlearn this value, because the truth is that doing favors for folks, again, is something that we should be doing out of a genuine love and care for someone. And it is okay for you to also say, I want to do this favor for you, but I'm stretched thin on time this week, or my spoons are really low, or I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And so I can't do that favor right now, because I know that if I do that, I might feel resentment or frustration about that later. So like, I want to, but I can't, right? That's also a perfectly acceptable thing to say. I just want to encourage people, I guess, to like approach this perspective shift from a more holistic approach, I guess, which is that it again, is important, in my opinion, and helpful for us to embrace the idea of doing favors for and being, in community with folks, and that will mean unlearning this capitalist value about our time inherently being tied to money and like, reciprocity. And also that it is okay for you to set these boundaries and to say like, I don't have the time or the spoons this week. And that doesn't mean you're doing the like weaponizing boundaries thing either, right? It's also a conversation that's going to continue to evolve over time. And I think in the realm of encouraging people to remember that we're people and perfection is impossible, it's also okay to get it wrong, to not do it correctly, or to like have stumbles and fumbles along the way, right? Like that's also part of being a person. And so the energy here, I guess, is just encouraging people to remember to live in the truth that boundaries and communal involvement are both necessities in regards to uplifting our ideal mental health. The challenge is in figuring out how to integrate those two things at the same time in a way that works for us in our own specific situation. I think the demonization of boundaries and all of that is also a thing that's like obviously not healthy for a bunch of reasons. And the conversation in the therapy world and community has kind of gotten lost in this like weaponizing therapy speak thing of like setting boundaries that are so rigid and firm and hyper real or hyper individualistic that they're, again, like no longer serving the purpose of like actually uplifting our mental health. For what it's worth, also, just as a like final note here, I also want to encourage people to remember that when you set a boundary, it doesn't have to be set in stone forever, right? I think this is also part of why the boundaries conversation can get us lost in the weeds a little bit, is that we operate under this cultural assumption, probably because the therapy world told us to, that if you set a boundary, that it has to be the same in all circumstances with all people, no matter what. And that's not true, right? It's okay to communicate to someone like, normally I wouldn't, but okay. Or like, maybe I'm a little bit overwhelmed this week, but I know that you're like really struggling too. So I'm going to like do something that maybe is like overextending myself a little bit, with the understanding that I can't do this all the time, right? Like honoring the nuance there, and also being communicative with people about our boundaries and the why behind our boundaries is super, super important and like really helpful. It's a thing that we should honor. I think especially with like the advent of therapy and mental health TikTok and like the rise of listicle style content, we can kind of get lost in this space of like rules and regulations about like the healthy way to do things. And again, part of being a human is that things are going to have nuance. There's going to be trial and error and also like exceptions to every rule or boundary. So give yourself the space to approach that in a way that feels more intuitive and like authentic to both you as a person, but also your specific situation. Okay, I know that this one was a little bit rambly and, kind of a lot, but like I said, I think that there is a worthwhile conversation to be had here. And I know that this will probably bring up thoughts and feelings for folks. So let me know what y'all think about this in the comments. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm also happy to talk about the like weaponization of therapy speak if you guys want me to. So let me know your thoughts about that. I'm hopeful that the conversation around this issue will continue to evolve, at least as far as the therapy and mental health community part of it is concerned, over time, because again, I am very much an advocate for the therapy world continuing to acknowledge the ways that we are biased and need to unlearn things. So I'm hopeful that we'll see a greater shift into a more balanced approach to the idea of boundaries and like, separation as far as like person to person is concerned. But I suppose, time will only tell. We'll see. Like I said, let me know what your thoughts and feelings are in the comments. Also, if you like the video, you can like the video and subscribe. Don't forget to go click that link in the description. Thank you to June's Journey for sponsoring this week's video. So go download that game for free and you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.